Housekeeping underway at the Overbay home. A lonesome task for a man who just 7 months ago lost his partner in life.
I had to tell my kids that mommy's not coming home.
Donnie's wife, Lindsay, was murdered back in February when a man with a handgun and briefcase full of pipe bombs walked off a bus into the Buffalo Allina Medical Clinic.
Send as many ambulances as you can.
By the time I got to the hospital, I found out that she had passed away on the OR table.
4 other people were injured. The community mourned, questions mounted, many persist.
Trying to figure out, well, why? I don't understand why.
Why and how?
I got 4 or 5 with gunshots. I there's the first ambulance.
How was a man with a documented history of violent threats and mental illness able to get a gun?
It doesn't make sense.
It's a mess. There are gaps here that simply should not be allowed.
Republican State Senator Jim Abler has already scheduled a hearing based on what our investigation found. That the accused Buffalo gunman is far from the only troubled Minnesotan to fall through a gap as our state fails to treat the mentally ill, failing to protect them and the public.
So we're failing the humanity test. We're failing the protection to the public test.
To get some of the answers we were seeking, we needed to talk with a man here at the Wright County Jail, whose voice you may not want to hear.
Yes, AJ, this is Gregory Bullrich.
We're not looking to give the accused Buffalo Clinic shooter a platform or fame. We're not broadcasting his rationalizations or finger-pointing, but some of what he has to say shines a light on the gap that cost an innocent young mom her life.
How did you get that gun?
I went to Fleet Farm and just bought it.
Nothing came up, nothing flagged when you tried to buy it?
Of course not. I had no history.
No history? That's not exactly true. 2 years before this,
At least 15 shots were fired.
Looking at least 5 injured critically.
court and police records show a dangerous history. Years of simmering anger over his push for opioids following a 2016 back surgery where physicians cut off his prescription because he was hospitalized for a potential overdose.
I was so mad, and I stayed mad.
October 13th, 2018. Police were contacted by a doctor at the Buffalo Clinic who said Ulrich was calling with threats about shooting, blowing things up, and practicing different scenarios of how to get revenge. That he was angry with the medical community, a threat to himself and society, and that he wanted it big and sensational so that it makes an impact. Ulrich was issued a harassment restraining order, but less than 3 weeks later, he was charged with violating it. The court ordered a mental health exam. A psychologist diagnosed him as mentally ill, citing his grandiosity, paranoia, and rigidity. He was found mentally incompetent to stand trial. Under Minnesota court rules, that meant his misdemeanor charges just had to be dropped without even an attempt to treat him and restore him to competency.
Gap is the perfect word for it.
Judge Catherine Messerich helped lead a 2019 work group that studied the gap for people found incompetent to go to trial, but who don't meet the standard for mandated treatment through civil commitment at a place like St. Peter's State Hospital. To date, there's been no consensus on how to close the gap.
What's the cost of that?
The cost of that is human lives.
When those charges were dropped, were you provided any mental health care?
No.
Just turned loose, with a hope and a prayer he wouldn't reoffend.
It's a judge's worst nightmare.
How often does this happen? Court data reveals from 2016 through 2020, more than 1,600 misdemeanor cases like Ulrich's were dismissed because the defendant was found incompetent. We found cases where a man groped a woman outside an ice cream shop. Found incompetent, case dismissed. He then went on to sexually attack 2 children in a parking lot.
That's amazing to me.
It's also happening in more serious crimes. Carol Levin found more than 2,100 gross misdemeanor and felony cases where the defendant was found incompetent, but judges had little to no authority to require them to get treatment. Take Augusta Kelly, found incompetent in 13 different cases, including felony terroristic threats, before chasing a woman with a knife, holding it to a 3-year-old's throat, demanding money. It wasn't until that felony charge a judge ordered he be sent to St. Peter's Security Hospital for mental health care.
There are cases after cases after cases of people who have been in this gap, in limbo, in the Swiss cheese system, where they've gone off and murdered somebody.
You on the Crossroads Atlanta Clinic?
Yes.
Back to Ulrich and that burning question about the gun.
If you're mentally incompetent to stand trial, how are you competent to own a weapon?
There's another gap in the Ulrich case. Not only was there a failure to treat when he was diagnosed as incompetent, the prosecutor dismissed the charges. A judge never officially ruled he was mentally incompetent, so there was nothing on his record preventing him from legally buying that handgun. Gaps upon gaps that cost Lindsay Overbay's life.
There's a hole, there's a void that just isn't going to be filled.
A psychologist recently diagnosed Ulrich as narcissistic and paranoid, but competent to go to trial on the murder charges. Senator Abeler has already scheduled a hearing on these gap cases for tomorrow. In the coming weeks, our investigation will continue as we explore gaps, putting people with mental illness who've committed violent felonies back in the community, even when a judge says they're dangerous and shouldn't be released.
East Bank Station.
Terrion Sherman's life is seemingly one wrong track after another. A hell on wheels existence filled with violence and run-ins with police.
So y'all take people to jail for getting into fights?
At the end of the line, a young woman who loved him, beaten, repeatedly stabbed.
I mean, Abigail was like brutally murdered.
Next to Abigail's body, Sherman's 2-year-old nephew, covered in blood but alive. According to police records, Sherman said the boy became possessed like a dog, told him Abigail was really a man and a dog, so he punched her hard as hell, but didn't remember stabbing her.
How do you explain this case?
You can't. It's a case that shouldn't have happened.
A KARE 11 investigation finds it's one of many violent crimes allowed by a break in the system, as Minnesota let Sherman and others fall through a gap, failing to treat their mental illness, failing to protect the public from known threats.
You can't even imagine this nightmare. You just can't imagine it.
Michelle and Tom Simpson
Hard for me to talk about.
are talking about their daughter Abigail's murder because they believe the responsibility lies not just with the man accused of killing her, but also at the door of this state agency.
I don't think people understand. Well, we certainly didn't.
To understand, you need Terrion Sherman's history. In 2016, he provoked an argument with a stranger on the train, followed him off to rob him.
Take his phone! Take his phone!
And with a friend, kicked and stomped his head into the tracks. In a plea bargain, he was convicted of just theft. The next year, 2017, he met 19-year-old Abigail Simpson from Wisconsin, who moved to St. Paul to get treatment at Hazleton for substance use issues.
She met him when she was in early recovery.
After treatment, Abigail returned to Wisconsin, while Sherman's troubles worsened. August 2018.
Breaking into cars, and he's been starting brush fires.
He was the subject of an all-out manhunt in Maplewood.
Been running around through the woods and neighborhoods terrorizing people with a garden hoe.
Also accused in 2 other assaults, including punching female employees while stealing from this store. But he wasn't convicted. A court ruled he was incompetent to stand trial, mentally ill, chemically dependent, and in need of treatment, because he posed a substantial likelihood of physical harm to self or others. The court ordered Sherman civilly committed to the custody of the Commissioner of the State Department of Human Services, DHS, which runs the St. Peter's Security Hospital. Just 2 months after he was committed, DHS issued this bulletin announcing a major policy change. Citing a shortage of mental health beds, DHS unilaterally decided to provisionally discharge, that means release, patients it felt no longer needed inpatient care, even people with histories of violence who had not yet been restored to competency. They explained it in this PowerPoint. To treat more people, they had to discharge more people. Terrion was sent to Joyful Home Healthcare, a Fridley group home.
Are you aware of any problems related to the change in how DHS handled competency restoration?
I don't know that I can answer that.
Dr. Kylie Stevens is DHS's chief medical officer. She says restoring a person to competency to face criminal charges is not their job. Treating mental illness is. So when they believe someone no longer needs a hospital bed level of care, they're now provisionally discharged.
It's very easy with large systems in government to think you've solved one problem and to create a whole new set of problems. And I think that's what happened here.
Judge Catherine Messerich explains that DHS decision created a new gap in the system. When someone like Terrion, still mentally incompetent to go to trial, is provisionally discharged, judges' hands are tied. They legally can't put them back in jail indefinitely.
They don't have the authority to do anything else but let them go.
And as a result, we have horrific events like what happened to Abigail.
Brandon Vaughn is an attorney representing Abigail's family, who didn't know until after her death Terrion was on provisional discharge from the state security hospital.
That's why we believe that this was preventable.
In the last 3 years, there have been 665 provisional discharges. But DHS says they don't track how many of those people were still incompetent. KARE 11 has identified multiple murders, stabbings, and violent assaults committed since then by people released while still incompetent.
Do things happen sometimes when people are on provisional discharge? Certainly. I can't tie that to any change that we made in our process.
Here's what happened with Terrion. Provisionally discharged at the group home, he was free to come and go. Records show during 8 months, he missed his daily antipsychotic medication 76 times and was even arrested, spotted selling narcotics on a Metro Transit train. Despite clear warning signs Terrion was not getting the treatment needed for a safe and stable life, Ramsey County, now responsible for his care, never tried to revoke his provisional discharge. Meanwhile, Abigail returned to the Twin Cities for school and work, and the two were dating.
She was in a relationship with him. She cared about him.
They were babysitting Terrion's nephew together the night he's now accused of killing her, while delusional, hallucinating she'd become a man. He was later diagnosed with drug-induced psychosis and is now back at St. Peter. To date, incompetent to be tried for Abigail's murder. Her family is begging Minnesota leaders to hear their story and close the gap.
Do it as if their child's life depended on it.
A Joyful Home, which was cited by the state for neglect in their care of Terrion Sherman, did not respond to our interview requests.
So if DHS says it's not their job to restore competency, then whose job is it?
That's really key because unlike in other states, in Minnesota, it's no one's job. Repeat that. It's nobody's job to restore people to competency. DHS says if the legislature wants them or someone else to do it, they need to pass a law and fund it. Until that happens, the gap is here to stay. February 6th, 2020, 9:30 at night. No provocation, no warning, just gunshots to the heads of 2 passengers on this Metro Transit bus. One man badly wounded, the other killed.
This could have been prevented.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In most news stories,
could have been prevented.
This is where you'd meet the victim's family. So, you are, but probably not the victim you expect. Geraldine Neighbors is the mom, Brittany Leslie.
He was saying that I need help.
The sister of Malcolm Leslie, the 26-year-old man on the bus accused of pulling the trigger. His family says the state failed to give him the mental health treatment a judge ordered.
And he was unraveling.
You could see that.
Yeah.
Scary.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm's family says signs of mental illness began to manifest as a child and in early adulthood worsened.
Could you tell that this was a man battling mental illness?
Yes.
Cab driver Kelly Sorempa picked Malcolm up December 30th, 2018 and drove him to Brooklyn Park. Confused on where he wanted to go, he tried to pay with marijuana.
I told him I'd call the police if he didn't pay me. And that's when I heard the click.
The click of a gun to her head. It didn't go off. Malcolm hopped out and ran, later arrested, charged with assault with a dangerous weapon. A court-ordered mental health exam diagnosed him with substantial psychiatric disorder, which grossly impairs his judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, and ability to reason or understand. A judge ruled Malcolm incompetent to go to trial. He agreed to be civilly committed for treatment, and the judge ordered him committed to the Commissioner of Human Services, DHS, which runs the St. Peter's Security Hospital and Anoka Regional Treatment Center.
The county attorney called me up and said that he is very mentally ill and that he's probably never gonna get out. And then I had saw online that he had shot up a bus and killed someone.
That someone? Tommy McCoy, taking the bus to meet a housing advocate as he attempted to move his daughter and grandkids from Chicago to live with him here in the Twin Cities.
Anybody could have been sitting on that bus.
Traherne Pollard.
Anybody.
Is McCoy's cousin. He says his family asked for answers, asked for accountability.
When it comes to accountability, now we got the finger-pointing game. Oh, it's your fault. Oh, it's your fault. Oh, it's their fault.
Our investigation finds what happened leading up to the death of Tommy McCoy were catastrophic failures on all levels of Hennepin County and Minnesota's criminal justice and mental health systems.
And it's such a tragedy.
Lisa Daly is executive director for the Treatment Advocacy Center, which focuses on the intersection of mental illness and the criminal justice system. She reviewed Malcolm's records for KARE 11.
It just seems like something really fell through the cracks there.
September 3rd, 2019. After the incident with a gun in the cab, Hennepin County Judge Phil Carruthers ruled Malcolm a substantial likelihood of causing physical harm, that he's incapable of voluntarily following a treatment plan, so required inpatient psychiatric treatment. This is when Malcolm agreed and the judge ordered him civilly committed to the commissioner of DHS. The order states, transportation will be provided by the sheriff of Hennepin County. Malcolm was to be held safe and secure, and the head of the treatment facility shall not permit his release, discharge, or provisional discharge until further order of the court.
This didn't happen?
No. No medications, no doctor's visits, no nothing.
Malcolm's family says all they know is he walked out of court and went home to live with his mom. He continued to deteriorate, hearing voices, becoming more and more delusional, self-medicating with drugs.
They sent him back to you?
Send him back home.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you a doctor?
No.
Did you know what to do with what you were seeing going on with your son?
No.
As months passed, court records show treatment reports were filed noting Malcolm's whereabouts were unknown. So, was anyone looking for him? There's no record anyone from DHS or Hennepin County actually tried to find him. He wasn't hiding.
He was home with me.
Backing that up, just 1 week before the bus shooting, records show Geraldine escorted her son to a court-ordered follow-up evaluation.
He just, slipped through the cracks.
Until 5 months after he was ordered committed, supposed to be held safe and secure, he got on that bus and for no discernible reason, pulled a gun.
The fact that this young man was able to walk out of that courtroom is a catastrophic failure to society. And unfortunately, my cousin was a recipient of that failure that could have happened to anyone. Anyone.
We've asked for interviews with judges, prosecutors, and DHS officials about this case. No one will go on the record to discuss the breakdown that caused an innocent man's death. It wasn't until after the bus shooting that Malcolm was actually taken to the state hospital for treatment.
A wild scene on a city street. An officer dragged, punched, and sent flying. It is one of the latest examples we've found of so-called gap cases, where criminal defendants with mental illness are released into Minnesota communities. Despite the state claiming it's being done safely, a KARE 11 investigation discovers no one is actually tracking what happens.
Alandis Augustin is a one-man crime wave. Police and court records reveal assaults on law enforcement, bank and store robberies, multiple unprovoked stabbings, hijacking a vehicle with a child inside, numerous acts of domestic violence, including this attack on a girlfriend, leaving her bloody and battered. He's also a man with mental illness who falls through a gap in a broken system.
It ain't fixing a thing. It's making it worse.
Ramsey County Public Defender Jim Fleming's office represents Augustin and others just like him. So-called gap cases, charged with crimes, incompetent to go to trial, civilly committed to treatment centers, but discharged while still incompetent, back onto the street in a legal limbo. A cycle that just repeats over and over and over.
Are these gap cases any secret to anyone?
No. No, everybody knows about them, and who are working in the system. The prosecutors know, the defense attorneys know, the judges know.
Talk to anyone working in the system, and they point to a major 2018 policy change by the State Department of Human Services. To free up treatment beds, DHS began provisionally discharging patients back into the community who are still incompetent to face the criminal charges hanging over their heads. Legally, they can't be sent back to jail indefinitely where there's no treatment. So, as Judge Catherine Messerick explains, they're often just let go.
There's not a lot you can do.
If a person is not able to go back to jail and they're not able to be maintained safely in the community, then we don't provisionally discharge them. It's as simple as that.
Dr. Kylie Stevens is DHS's chief medical officer. She defends her agency's decision, but has no data to back up the assertion it's being executed safely.
Do you track how many patients who have been provisionally discharged since this change go on to commit more crimes?
We have no way of tracking that information.
DHS doesn't track it. The courts don't track it. Neither does anyone else. State Senator Jim Abler has already begun holding hearings in response to Carol Evans' investigation.
Part of the problem is, since nobody tracks these individuals who are running around the community, because it's nobody's responsibility, no one knows what happens.
So, what happens? Carol Evans tried to do what no one else in the state is, track these cases. What we found flies in the face of DHS's claim that they only release people who are safe to be in the community.
In St. Paul alone, we identified violent assaults, including a police officer dragged down the street by a speeding pickup while being punched, according to criminal charges, by Damone Ivory, who had been provisionally discharged just 2 weeks prior. We found a case where a stranger raped a woman outside in downtown at 4 in the afternoon. Then there's the murder of Abigail Simpson, killed by a provisionally discharged boyfriend hallucinating she'd become a man. Attorney Brandon Vaughn represents Abigail's family.
But oftentimes, there isn't real monitoring for these individuals who are provisionally discharged, and that's what puts the public in danger.
Despite limited access to records, to date, Carol Levin has identified 58 provisional discharge gap cases where the person committed new crimes. Alandis Augustin is a poster child. March 16, 2020, charged in the same night with assaulting this woman, then stabbing his neighbor numerous times in the chest. Mentally ill, incompetent to stand trial, he was civilly committed, sent to DHS's Anoka Metro Regional Treatment Center. September 2020, provisionally discharged, still incompetent to go to trial for the stabbing. February 2021, he's charged with stabbing another man, again incompetent to go to trial, committed as mentally ill, sent back to Anoka. Then, in July, DHS once more provisionally discharged him into the community, still incompetent, where no one's tracking the consequences of that decision.
If we have, as society, have made a policy decision that we're going to do it this way, we need to know what the consequences of that are. And we need to do better.
The legislature has begun holding hearings about these gap cases, and Ramsey County started its own working group trying to come up with solutions on the local level. But it's hard to find fixes when it's done piecemeal and when no one even knows exactly how big a problem this is.
Tonight, our investigative team exposes how a man too sick to be prosecuted for rape is considered by the state to be safe enough to live in the community without even the police knowing he's there. Here's AJ Legault with our ongoing investigation, The Gap.
And I'm constantly looking over my shoulder.
Laura Carlson knew the house next door in her quiet Fridley neighborhood,
the blue one,
had recently become a group home. But had no clue who would move in and what would happen.
I mean, geez, that dude was like a sexual predator right next door.
You won't find Omar Issa on Minnesota's sex offender registry. He doesn't have to register his address with police. He's never been convicted of a sex crime. On the public court website, his record shows just one old gross misdemeanor. Nothing that hints at the truth.
He's dangerous.
In 2017, Amina Botan was approached outside the Carmel Mall in Minneapolis by Omar Issa.
And he asked me a favor. Sister, I'm sick. Can you help me?
Amina agreed to give him a ride. It was a mistake. Once in the car, she says a ride home was not what this man wanted.
You can tell the way he's touched me, it's not good.
She pulled over at this intersection and ordered him out.
He said, I have the gun and his anger.
Amina says she jumped out, but he grabbed her. A struggle ensued here in the street as she screamed for help and he yelled that she was his wife. He's trying to pull you back into the car and he's telling people that you're his wife.
Yeah, and I say, no, I'm not his wife. Help.
He was trying to take you.
Yeah, front of people.
With witnesses calling police, Issa let her go, but stole her car. He was arrested 3 days later for aggravated robbery. Amina thought he'd go to prison. Instead, police and court records show he's repeatedly walked free, leaving a trail of sexually assaulted women.
It's clear that he's a ticking time bomb.
Mark Gray is a civil mental health attorney appointed since 2009 to represent Omar Issa. He says Issa, who is severely mentally ill, repeatedly falls through gaps in Minnesota's legal and mental health systems.
Well, I don't think there's any question we are failing him.
Found incompetent to stand trial for the carjacking, a judge ordered him civilly committed to the care of the Minnesota Department of Human Services to ensure his safety and that of others. It was Issa's fifth commitment. DHS held him at the Anoka Treatment Center less than 6 months before provisionally discharging him back into the community.
I call it a revolving door.
Repeatedly in trouble, Issa bounced in and out of jail, courts, and the mental health system until August of 2020. He's charged with raping a woman on this picnic table while witnesses screamed at him to stop. Again, incompetent to stand trial. Again, civilly committed. Again, provisionally discharged by DHS. He was sent to the Fridley Group Home next door to Laura Carlson.
And she ran from this house over here up my front step.
On September 9th, a terrified woman ran to Laura's door. Court records show Issa had suddenly attacked a female worker in the group home, grabbed her neck, struck her in the face and chest in a violent sexual assault before she escaped.
She was crying and screaming.
The very next day, at the Anoka courthouse, the inexplicable happened.
Even though it was allegedly Issa's third attack, even though he was still under his by now 8th civil commitment order, a judge let Issa walk free.
He was also issued a no-contact order, prohibiting him from going to the group home where he was technically under civil commitment. That judge's order made Issa homeless. He disappeared onto the streets, missing numerous court dates.
That's not good for him, it's not good for society.
He wasn't arrested until after KARE 11 exposed how the courts and the mental health system had lost the accused sexual predator. We found him hanging out at the same mall where he approached Amina 4 years ago.
He scared me, really scared me.
The first woman he's charged with attacking now wants to know how many victims it will take before Minnesota gives Issa the level of care and oversight he needs.
Is he dangerous?
More than dangerous.
For KARE 11 Investigates, The Gap, Failure to Treat, Failure to Protect, I'm AJ Legault.
Well, the legislature is already holding hearings in response to KARE 11's ongoing investigation. You can read and watch the entire GAP investigation on KARE11.com.